watching the recording. So, for those of you who are watching this later, welcome to Behind the Panel, where we take one of your favorite creators in the comic book industry and have a great conversation about who they are, what they've done, and what they're doing now. Today, we have the Obi-Wan Kenobi of the comic book industry with us. He was gracious enough to rejoin us. Bryan, thanks so much for coming back on.
Oh, well, Bryan, that's a name I haven't heard in a long time. A long time.
What would your Ben Kenobi pseudonym?
Oh, it's funny. When I was playing KOTOR or something, I made a Bryan Jen.
Okay.
So it was BRI-YON, then space JINN. And that's generally my Star Wars name.
Okay, what are the chances you change your Twitter handle to that when episode 9 comes out?
Oh, I heard something actually that made me feel pretty good about episode 9. I read an IGN article that said that episode 9 will be set a year after Last Jedi.
Okay.
And that pleases me because what's frustrated me the most about this new trilogy is the second movie happened immediately on the heels of the first. And I'm not used to that in Star Wars, right? Because I always thought the whole point in casting Daisy and John was they could play a little younger than they actually look. Mm-hmm. So when you went to them in Last Jedi, you could really advance their arcs. And I was really disappointed that we didn't get an advancement of the arc. I expected Finn to be out of traction. He's a resistance fighter. Rey's been gone for a long time. Where is Rey? I had that kind of Empire Strikes Back thing in my head that there would be this gap in time in the narrative.
Yeah.
And we would kind of show up because the interesting thing about Star Wars movies in terms of timeline is the time of the actual movies, it's very short, right? I mean, usually a Star Wars movie takes place in the matter of 35, 40 hours. Mm-hmm. So if you really think about it so far, they found Rey on Monday, and on Wednesday, Kylo Ren has taken over the First Order, Luke is dead. It's a big week Rey is having, right?
Yeah, that's eventful. I mean, I thought my finals weeks were busy.
Yeah, that's a big week, right? So that's because it was hard for me to get that out of my mind, because between Star Wars and Empire, Luke had acquired new force powers because we hadn't seen telekinesis really in Star Wars until Empire. That was a new power, right? So that was a big deal when he made the lightsaber move, because we knew that they could do Jedi mind trick and all that, but we didn't know that they could move things.
Yeah.
And then between Empire and Jedi, it feels like years have passed, enough time that Leia could have ingratiated herself. Leia made the plan to dress up in the bounty hunter thing. Lando's already there, right? And deep in Jabba's palace, Luke has built his own lightsaber. He's got a new outfit. So you felt like at least a couple years had passed between between Empire and Jedi.
Right.
So I'm hoping that rumor is true. Also, I know they got rid of the canon, EU stuff and all of that.
Yeah.
But the space between movies used to be a really great space to do comics, novels, video games, what have you. And I know they do a little bit of that now. I know Jodie Hauser. I know she writes a lot of stuff that takes place after Last Jedi. And so they're kind of exploring that. But, remember back to the prequels, I think you got 3 novels that took place between the different prequel movies.
Maybe. Yeah.
As I recall, however one feels about the prequels, there was quite a bit of time that had passed. Enough time that they could do an entire, television series called The Clone Wars about it. So, so that makes me feel a little better because the movies were turning a bit into, what it is, I think, and this is just conjecture because I don't know anyone working on the Star Wars franchise intimately. I mean, I know people who worked on it, but they won't tell me anything. I feel like maybe some of the Marvel style had some mission creep into the Star Wars movies. So they were a little more kind of on the heels of each other, but that made the Star Wars films feel like a television show in a way.
Yeah.
Not Phantom Menace, Force Awakens and Last Jedi, it sort of feels like 2 episodes of a TV show. Okay, this week, okay, this happened this week, this happened next week, cool. So I hope that this brings back kind of the more epic feeling, and we'll get like Rey in a new outfit, Finn in a new outfit. Like I
If
don't want to see Finn in that jacket.
if nothing else, we get the premier galactic fashion show.
Yeah, like I want to see Rey in like some cool, I don't know, new like gray Jedi garb, and I want Finn to have maybe like some facial hair and like a new jacket or something. Like I
A
don't know.
new jacket. I can just imagine you in the theater. The jacket.
Well, I was looking at Last Jedi, and I'm like, Rey and Finn haven't changed clothes. Those clothes must stink. Like Rey must smell really bad
Yeah,
because she hasn't changed clothes since Force Awakens.
that's fair.
Right? She's in the
That's
same
entirely
outfit. So yeah, but what I'm hearing sounds interesting. I mean, Hamill's back in some form, so that'll be cool. My biggest disappointment was we didn't get any sense that Luke had talked to Anakin at all. And
Yeah.
you would think that like that would be if he saw his father's ghost at the end of Return of the Jedi. He's never had a relationship with his father, right?
Yeah.
But he could see Yoda and Ben and Anakin. You would think that he would have had time to talk to Anakin, to get lessons from him, to prevent like what happened to him from happening to someone else, whatever it is. But I don't get the sense that Luke has had much of that, and I find that a little odd. So I hope they deal with that in this episode 9.
Yeah, I'm really split, because I wasn't one of those people that, deep delved into like all the Dark Horse comics and the novels that were previous to like the Disney takeover.
Yeah.
So like it's weird because I can understand that, how upset people are and that they feel that, the future of the Star Wars universe was robbed from them, but I can also understand that it's not really Luke's story anymore. So
Oh, totally. Yeah. It's I'm not like, one of those anti new trilogy people. It's just, there are certain things that my mind danced around for years.
right,
And one of the things one of the scenes I always wanted to see was a scene where Luke Skywalker was talking to the ghost of Anakin Skywalker.
yeah.
I just wanted to see that moment. And it was never in a novel. It's never been in a comic book. But since so much of what's going on in these movies is sort of like still the fallout of Darth Vader in a way, right? Like Kylo Ren is still very much, at least he was thinking about Vader throughout Force Awakens. Maybe he's walked away from that now. But a lot of this still feels like we're cleaning up Skywalker messes.
Yeah.
Like we're still cleaning up the messes of the Skywalkers.
That's very true.
With Ben Solo and him turning and all of that, and Luke being what he has been, and Kylo's obsession with Vader. I don't even know if we know if Kylo knows that Anakin Skywalker was Darth Vader. I have questions.
I assume that
Many
I
questions.
assume that I don't know. I read so long story short, somebody told me that the novel Bloodlines would give me more backstory on like the Snoke Kylo relationship, like how they meet, like how did that escalate to Kylo eventually becoming like for all intents and purposes a terrorist. And so I read the whole book. That didn't happen. But one thing that
it didn't, right? There was like one page where like someone from the Knights of Ren got like a lightsaber or something from the black market, right?
I mean, from Bloodlines, yeah. I mean, like there was somebody in the Senate who like collects old Imperial memorabilia, essentially.
Right.
But like the one big thing that I can say was that they like somebody exposed Leia as being the daughter to. I mean, maybe they don't because nobody really. I don't know because they knew that Luke and Leia were brother and sister, and they find out that. Darth Vader was her father, so I assume the galaxy knows that Anakin Skywalker was Darth Vader.
It's just it's weird. Like maybe it's because they don't want people looking backwards and they want people looking forwards, but it feels like there's a lot of like hanging threads that aren't like critical to arc plot, but would be interesting to resolve in terms of characterization that haven't been dealt with yet. So. I'm hoping that whatever the story of episode 9 is, we get some kind of closure on that. Like I'd love to see Hayden Christensen show up in episode 9.
Yeah, no, I mean, I want more than anything to see Ewan McGregor back on screen as Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yeah, like there's there's some things there. So I'm hoping that, and JJ is such a fan of nostalgia. He's definitely more of a nostalgic creator than Ryan Johnson is. So maybe that will lead him to wanting to resolve, some of those things for audiences, or maybe they'll open the universe up again to novels that deal with that. I mean, they have a lot of time with Luke on was it Octo, right?
Yeah.
So there's all that time that Luke's been there. What was he doing? Like, there's some interesting space. There's these two books that I love. One's called like the Book of the Sith, and one's called I think like the Book of the Force or something.
Mhm.
And they're just about Force philosophy. One of them is a book of Jedi philosophy and kind of sort of technique, I guess, and the other is a book of Sith philosophy that's written by Palpatine himself. Or no, it's written. I forgot who it's written by, but there are notes and quotes written into the book
Mhm.
by Palpatine, and I think that's really neat. I think you can still get them on Amazon. They're really cool. If you're into Star Wars like Force lore, you
Yeah.
should definitely have both of those books. They're great.
No, I'll have to check that out. That sounds pretty cool. I mean, I know I got a buddy of mine who's a huge Star Wars nut, so I'll definitely look into that.
I didn't mean to turn this into a Star Wars podcast, but you know, here we are.
No,
Uh,
I mean it's geeky. That's totally relevant. But I guess for those who are watching that for some reason aren't aware of what you're doing or what you've done.
yeah.
So Brian
Mm,
is like the jack of all trades. He's been involved in a number of different creative projects. From what I understand, you were like a graphic designer, you're a photographer, amongst many other things, as well as what we're here to talk about today, being a writer,
yeah.
namely comic books, television. You've done more screenwriting in terms of film, from what I understand. But
Hmm.
so comic book wise, I know a number of you guys watch me for comic books. And Brian's been a part of, Detective Comics for DC, Wildstorm, Michael Cray, Postal. He's currently doing Killmonger for Marvel, as well as a Batman in the Outsider series that's going to be coming out sometime, hopefully in the near future, and
Hmm.
American Carnage, which I have the second issue of right here. Um, all of which are fantastic. And I know a lot of you guys have been keeping up with the Titans TV show and the DC Universe streaming services. He's also been heavily involved in that, and I think it with the Asylum episode was like your spearheaded one, correct?
Yeah, it was episode 5, the one at the motel. I think it's called Together, and then
Mhm.
episode 7, Asylum. Those were both the ones I worked on. I co-wrote those with Gabrielle Stanton. I co-wrote episode 5 with, and then I co-wrote 7 with the showrunner Greg Walker.
Yeah, no, I mean, dude, the Titans, man. So I guess just like kick starting the conversation now that the season is finally ended, so there are likely to be spoilers for those of you who watching. Um, man, you guys did a great job with this show. Like, let me start off first and foremost by saying that because I think generally speaking, like Titans had a lot of backlash because of costume choices and a bunch of other what I think to be irrelevant things. But like, you guys ended up blowing it out of the water. So
Oh well,
uh,
thank you. Well, I was just a small part of it. A TV show is always a village, and we've got Akiva Goldsman and Jeff Johns and Greg Walker. They're kind of leading the charge. And then season 1, we also had high-powered writers like Gab Stanton, who I mentioned before.
mhm,
She's worked in sci-fi for years on a bunch of stuff, since the '90s, really. So she's kind of a master at her craft, and Rich Haddon, one of the writers there, he's also fantastic. Marisha Mukherjee, another writer. So there's a lot of talent in the room. And we the trick of a show like that is to get everyone to use their mutant powers
mhm,
to do the same thing, right? I mean, working on a show like that is sort of like Wolverine has to jump up and pop the claws, and then Cyclops grabs him and spins him around, and then throws him, and then Cyclops heats up the claws with an optic blast, and then Wolverine slashes the Sentinel with the heated claw. Like you have to really coordinate all of that stuff, and then Professor X, freezes somebody in place while they can make an escape. So
mhm,
it's difficult to do that, to get everyone to be both fully themselves but also elements of a whole.
mhm.
And Greg, the showrunner, he's really great at doing that. I learned a lot from working with him.
Yeah, and I can imagine the experience is different because it's not like regularly syndicated on television type of thing. You know, like you guys wrapped the whole season before the first episode came out, correct?
Yes, we did. Streaming, it's funny, the timelines are all weird, but yeah, I mean, every show is different. Streaming works in kind of unique ways, and scheduling and how all that comes about, a lot of that's above my pay grade. I don't really make those choices.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, you do have the ability, I think, to maybe get a little bit more of a long view when
Mhm.
you're working in streaming, because you're not doing 22. I mean, the other Berlanti shows, Arrow, Flash, what have you, they do 22s. I think 21 or 22 or something like that. That's a lot. That's a lot of episodes.
Yeah.
So there's no way you're going to be able to get it all done before production's really heating up. I
Mm.
know Beth Schwartz is running Arrow right now, and they have those massive crossovers too. Like
Yeah,
we didn't have to deal with that. We had the Doom Patrol episode,
which was
which was
great.
really, that was Jeff's vision. Jeff Johns.
Mm.
He Jeff has such a clear vision of what he wants
Mm.
that when he's in the room, you just sort of follow his lead. He calls the play, and then you block for him, and then he scores the touchdown, right? Um, but they have like massive shows to cross over that have somewhat different styles, and all the actors have to be served well by the script. It's a really big undertaking, what they're doing. So we're able to be a little bit inoculated from that pressure because we are on the DC Universe streaming service, and we were the launch show.
Yeah, that's true. No, I mean, I think you guys set a really high bar. I mean, from beginning to end, I was pretty into the season. Um, on like Together, I didn't know you wrote Together. Kudos, man. That was one of my favorite episodes of the season.
Oh, well, thank you. It's when you think about TV, the middle of the season. If you have like 12 or 13 episodes, whatever, you're looking at episode 5, episode 6, whatever. That's when you start to shift into a different feel.
Mhm.
And that episode it's really a Western. It's just like the heroes have to gather up into the small town, and then here come the black hats walking
Yeah.
down Main Street, calling out who they're calling out, and then the heroes have to face them down. So we really approach that with that sense of the Western.
Mhm.
And that the use of isolation and the location and all of that to give it it's almost like a bit of a timeless feel in a way, because you're removed from the kind of the day-to-day modernity of like the center of the city.
Mhm.
Instead you're sort of on the outskirts. And yeah, so it was a fun episode to do, but it was cold. It was very cold when we were shooting it.
Yeah.
And Brenton is a soldier, man. Like that guy gets out there in frigid weather doing martial arts, and it's difficult to do because you can pull a muscle, and it's really easy to hurt yourself
Yeah.
when you're doing that. And Larnell Stovall, the fight coordinator, he really showed up. Teague, the other fight coordinator, really helped plan out the stunts on that one. And then Mustafa Brenton stand-in,
Mhm.
he did a fantastic job. So yeah, it's always hard to pin it down to one thing or another thing. Our editors are great. Our sound designers are awesome. I think Clint Mansell's did music for us. So there's so many moving parts. Boris, the DP.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to know what you have until you see it all put together. You just
Yeah.
never really know. I've been on sets where I thought what I was watching was gangbusters. Well, this is great. The dailies look great. This all looks great. And then you see it cut together, and something's gone. Like something just didn't get captured.
Right. Right.
You know what? Like you were there, and like, well, it felt really good
Mhm.
there, but something didn't translate. And I've been on sets where everything looks terrible, where you're just like, I don't know what's going on. It looks like pure chaos. And then an editor comes in and starts cutting it together, and then what you get is magical, right? That's the terror and the joy of working in filmmaking is you never really know what you have until you finish putting it all together.
And have you watched the whole season? Have you gotten a chance to see it?
I've seen early cuts of everything. I don't watch it as broadcast,
Mhm.
um, mainly because I always get weird watching my own work sometimes. so,
Yeah, I can imagine.
but I watched all the cuts as they were coming in. So I've seen it in like 90% form for
That's
sure.
true. That's awesome. No, I mean it's so I remember the last time we talked, you had said that previous to this, you didn't have a lot of comic book experience with the Titans or the Teen Titans. It was really, for the most part, you said, you were a big Batman guy, and obviously Robin appears in Batman, so you've experienced Dick Grayson. What was that like for you? I mean, because you're trying to accomplish two very different things that ultimately culminate in the TV show, right? You're trying to do um, proud by the creators and the original source material, and you're also trying to adapt them to a totally different medium and frankly a totally different I guess setting and time, a different place and time. So
Mm.
what was that like for you getting to take those characters, that you didn't know as well, and getting to both learn them as they were in the source and work with them in television?
Well, I'll tell you, man, it would have been really nerve-wracking, mainly because I know those characters mean a lot to people, right? And whenever I'm working on a character, I know that character means a lot to people.
Right.
I'm very cognizant of making sure that the fans that are really into that character, that really identify, aren't thrown under the bus. But the great thing about working on Titans is you have Jeff Johns.
Right. He's
No
the
one knows
encyclopedia.
DC Comics more than Jeff Johns, right?
Yeah.
So like you can trust that he will keep you on track. So the beauty of having him in the room and having him, lead this charge on the show is we in the room can come up with anything that sounds cool to us, but we always know that Jeff is going to keep us from doing something we shouldn't do, right? And it takes trust, but I do trust Jeff. I've known Jeff now well for a couple of years,
Mhm.
and he's obviously a very successful guy, and kind of young to be as successful as he is, but
Right.
even with all of that, he doesn't carry that into the room with him. He just genuinely loves storytelling and
Yeah.
loves these characters. So you just depend on him,
Yeah.
to let you know, okay, that's not this, that's not that. And I feel like I have a pretty good rudder on Batman.
Mhm.
So I feel very comfortable with Batman and Gotham and all of that. But yeah, I wasn't, I'd read the Wolfman work, some of it growing up. I remember the Who is Donna Troy story. I thought that was really cool. It was like a film noir style comic
Mhm.
from back in the day. But I didn't have a lot of fluency with those characters. So I had to depend a lot on Jeff. And I'd ask him a bunch of questions. Why do you feel about this? How do you feel about this? Because I might have had a perspective on Robin. But my perspective on Robin comes through Batman,
Right.
right? And so I never really had a ground up, from Dick Grayson perspective on him. And then when it came to Corey and Gar and Rachel, I had a little bit of Raven because I like spooky stuff. I like magic. I like that kind of stuff. So, I always thought Raven was cool, and I would dip in and read like a couple comics every now and then, kind of watch her appearances. I thought that was kind of neat. If you look at the old, kind of the early '80s stuff that's there, all of the Raven stuff has like this awesome heavy metal spray painted on the side of a van kind of
Yeah.
quality to it.
Yeah. Added with teenage angst.
With like teenage angst, like Judas Priest kind of wrapped up in that. So that spoke to me. But with Gar and Corey especially, I didn't know very much at all going into it. But like when you have someone that's fluent in how that stuff works, it's easy to feel safe when you're taking risks.
No, that's true. And I will say, like on Jeff's behalf, I was fortunate to meet him really briefly at New York Comic Con this year,
Oh
and
yeah.
and being as busy as he was, and I knew he was like on a time crunch, man. He was so incredibly friendly and willing to meet people, and especially now that he's really getting like some big movie credits, like blockbuster credits under his name with like Wonder Woman and
Mm-hmm.
Aquaman, and Titans, and amongst obviously his incredible comic book work. He was just a stellar guy. Like honestly, man, like I like when I met him, shook his hand, like I took a picture with him. Like my legs were shaking. I was like, holy shit! Like this guy, like he's created some of the best, most impactful stories I've ever read in my life.
Yeah,
And
he's sometimes in Hollywood you meet somebody and they teach you how you want to be if you become successful in that way, right? And Jeff is very much that guy. Like you meet him and you're like, "Yep, that's what I want to be." If I am fortunate enough to produce big movies and be part of like these huge things and have that kind of position. I want to be like that,
Right.
you know, because that guy manages to do all of that stuff, but he hasn't lost the play. And that's a really important thing when you're working in genre, is to have fun with it. Like, part of you has to be playing with toys. You know, like, if you're not connected to that, then I think your work is going to be missing a little bit of something. If you're too adult, if you're too grown, you know,
Right.
like, you always want to keep that childhood, like, cool feeling. You know, like when Brenton came out of the trailer for the first time in the Robin suit, you want to feel that, like, that 13-year-old part of you that's like, oh wow, he looks like Robin. You know, like, that's just an awesome thing. And Jeff's managed to preserve that, and a lot of people in Hollywood haven't. You know, a lot of them, you know, they get successful and they get to a certain level, and they've pushed childhood so far away from them that I think they've lost some of that connection. But if you think about the really great, like, storytellers, you know, like the Jim Camerons and the JJs and the Jeff Johnses and those types of folks. I imagine Patty Jenkins is like this as well. I've never met Patty, but I would imagine she's like that just based on what Wonder Woman was like.
Right.
There's a joy there, right? There's part of them that is there's a fan in that. You know, like, if you look at James Cameron, I remember Cameron came to I think it was NYU, when I went to NYU, and he was talking about something or other. I think he was talking about, like, the technology of film or something. You know, he's trying to push the medium forward. And he was so just boyishly excited about what he was talking about. You left that auditorium jazzed up. You know, you were just ready to go create, because he still felt like that guy that was working with Stan Winston, crinkling aluminum foil to make the last few minutes of the Terminator work.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that part is really important. So for anyone listening to this or watching this, who's a creator, and you're on your professional path, and you're thinking about your future and all of that, and you've got the worries and all that stuff that goes on, don't let all that stuff douse that fire of childhood. Like, play. Always keep the part of yourself that plays alive and well, because that's where it's really going to come serve you in the end. You know, when you got to write, like, 35 pages of whatever because something happened, you know, like, you've got to access the fun in that. You know, when you're standing outside in Toronto and it is brick cold, and you're like, you know, your hand is shaking when you're drinking the set coffee, you want to really have fun and just appreciate the fact that you're there. You know, Ryan Potter, the guy that plays Beast Boy, Gar Logan, he's just a great dude, like, just a cool guy, and he infuses that character with so much heart and so much compassion. You know, you think about, like, episode 5. There's a scene, for people that haven't watched it, there's a scene in episode 5 when Beast Boy is talking to Raven about what it feels like to transform when he transforms.
Yeah.
And I remember I wrote that and rewrote it and wrote that and rewrote it. You know, like, I really worked on that because I wanted that to be a moment. And you're standing there, you're looking at the monitor, and Ryan is just nailing it. You know, he's just making these words on a page just come alive, and you can't feel anything but gratitude.
You know, that show was incredibly well cast.
Yeah, well, that was David Rappaport who did the casting on that. I mean, he does a lot of those, does a lot of Greg Berlanti stuff. You know, that was Jeff too, and that was Jeff and Greg Walker and Akiva. You know, I mean, you've got a lot of people that make. I tell you what, I have become 3 times the storyteller I was before working on Titans, just from working on that show with those people. You know, like you can see I can see the effects of it in American Carnage. I can see the effects of it in Killmonger. You know, I can just see what being part of that process has done to my work, even though those books are darker and more intense and personal in different ways and all that. That experience working with them has buttressed my work in a way that I'll always be grateful for. Yeah, and you know, right now I'm in a stage of my life where it's hard to feel anything but gratitude. Like, you know, that's kind of like I wake up grateful all the time. Like, that is the dominant emotion.
I mean, you know, to your merit, Bryan, not only are you crafting incredible stories, you, as a creator, and I think that this is something that I've kind of garnered and understood more via, you know, talking to you online and getting to talk to you via these chats, man. I mean, you're incredibly humble. You know, like the last time we talked, and I can say this full-heartedly, my outlook on interacting with people in general was changed, forever altered by our last conversation together.
Oh, right on.
I mean, like, you know, one of the things like you had stressed was you don't know the person behind the keyboard or behind the, you know, the trolly little messages in a Twitter like subtweet, you know. So stuff like things like that are what really, you know, got me to think and made me personally a little bit more, I guess, pensive rather than reactive.
Well, it's always look when you're interacting with someone's Twitter account, you're interacting with their billboard,
Mhm.
right? They're advertising themselves in a way, and you know we all do that. And it's important to remember that yeah, you have no idea what's going on in a person's life, and you know when I'm going to call myself a public figure. I don't mean that in a self-aggrandizing way.
Oh, right.
I'm not saying I'm a celebrity. I just mean like, you know, when you're on Twitter and you're putting creative work out there that people purchase with their own money and what have you, and it gets published around the world, you become somewhat more public. And when you do that, you do occasionally, you know, draw in some spite, some negativity. You know, I
Right.
get my little share of it. But I've never really had a situation where you know, there's a couple of people on Twitter who, no matter what I do, no matter how patient I am, seem determined to just be argumentative and kind of mean.
Yeah.
But that's so few. That's so rare. You know, that's like.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
I
I know.
mean,
Thank you. My food arrived. So for everyone watching this on YouTube, I called a Postmates while I was on the phone. So,
no, man, you've been, you know, working hard all day, so don't worry
but
about it.
but yeah, you know, like you never know, right? And the vast majority of uh, the interactions I have, even when they start negative, if you just say, "Well, hey, man, you know, you seem like you're in a bad mood. Like, what's going on?" Right? And it'll usually take people aback. Well, I was planning on mocking you on the internet, but you asked me how I was doing.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like, have you ever heard that? I guess it's a piece of advice because someone's like, you know, if somebody bigger than you ever wants to get into a fight, just drop your pants.
Yeah, totally.
They won't know what to do with you, really.
Yeah, you know, it takes mutual investment to to continue negativity, right? Like you have to willfully be part of it. It's hard to do that. It's hard for someone to tango alone. So you know, I just don't try to feed into it.
Mhm.
And I can look. You can catch the low hanging fruit of fun or Schadenfreude when you know people are mean to you, and maybe you come up with that witty zinger comeback and you retweet them with the thing. But then I feel like I'm punching down a little bit because I get to be, you know, me. You know, like I'm creating work. I'm very fortunate to have the opportunities I have, and I don't really feel a need to kind of spread that negativity. And if someone's determined to be that way, then I just kind of ignore them. You know, like American Carnage has certainly made me a beacon of some stuff.
No,
Uh,
I can imagine. It is very evocative, thought provoking.
well, I was talking to someone. A perfect example is someone. I'm not going to name who it is because I don't want people to look them up. But someone on Twitter who I talk to not regularly, but every now and then, kind of came at me with some barbs. Right? They came at me swords drawn about American Carnage, about
Mhm.
something a character had said, and it really bothered them because they didn't agree with what that character was saying, and they thought it was a mischaracterization of whatever the idea was that's been presented in the book and all that. And I listened patiently, and I told them, "You do remember that's a character,
Right.
right? Like that's not me saying I feel this way. Because if you want to find out how I feel about politics in America, then I guess I have to write a nonfiction essay. However, most people are, so I don't think I'll join that party.
Mhm.
So, you know, a book isn't. Sometimes we think that a book has to be like what the author is feeling. I don't think Thomas Harris actually eats people.
Okay.
Don't I
Yeah.
don't think he advocate. I mean, you know, he created Hannibal Lecter, but I don't think cannibalism is his driving force.
That
So
that is that is a fair assumption to make.
right. So yeah, I just think it's important, for people in general, when you're experiencing work, and if something happens in a book and it bothers you and whatever, just remember that the author is, one, probably not trying to bother you.
Right.
Two, probably doesn't believe in what's in the book, lock, stock, and barrel, because it's a book. And books are about many things. If I was going to write a book about the Crips and the Bloods, for instance, it doesn't mean that I think people should just set up and, start doing drive-bys. Like, no, that's just what the book would be about.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I don't know. American Carnage, something like that. I think advocates against it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's with that book in particular. For those that are watching that are familiar with this book, it's a book about a mixed race FBI agent who appears white, who goes undercover into a white supremacist organization in California. And my overall goal, if I have a goal beyond just telling a cool crime story, it's to get us to re-examine the causality of our anger and our hatred,
Right.
and think about the consequence of it, like in every way, right? Just in every way, because we're so polarized right now, and a lot of that comes top down through the media, through government, whatever it is, right? I'm not laying the blame at anyone's feet, because for everything that this politician might say that can get everyone upset, there's also 17 media outlets that can't wait to tell you what they said to get you upset, right? So it's you can't lay the blame at one thing or another. But I think we as individuals have to be more cognizant of how we respond to stimulus.
No, and that's one of the things that I noted from the first issue, even and the second, is that you're very clearly not approaching this with like a political bias. It's really just an examination on the flaws of, obviously, an American Carnage, so to speak, like what the evils of our society, the evils of the structure that we've created. And I love the fact that, again, you approach it from a more humanitarian perspective, somewhere where, from a perspective where everybody is, no particular group necessarily is at fault, and it's poking holes in all of the negatives that arise from each different, I guess, facet, or I guess each different viewpoint.
Well,
So,
like I do believe that we are ultimately responsible for our own choices. So I'm not saying, now that like people are responsible for things they do. However, what you'll see in the book is that when Morgan, who is the antagonist of this book,
mhm.
who is the central figure in this movement that the protagonist Richard Wright is trying to understand. And the question is whether or not Win Morgan personally ordered the murder of an FBI agent. That's what we're trying to figure out in the story, right? If you look at Win, to me, Win is a person with no ideology, really, except his own vanity. He's a narcissist. And everything that he does is driven by his own narcissism. And he's a predator, and he's a predator upon people that are suffering low self-esteem, that are turning to anger because they don't want to deal with their fear.
Mm-hmm.
And he sees opportunity in that. And the question I would kind of pose to people is, do you think about your life, the influences that you have, and who may just be profiting off of your negative emotion?
Right. And kind of riding off of that, I don't know, from what I've kind of interpreted as a reader, it seems like you're examining the predatory nature of discrimination, and kind of how, that type of power struggle is evolving. I mean, a little bit of a spoiler, I guess, Win Morgan kind of denounces association with kind of the more overt, publicly aggressive, stereotypical white racists, and is approaching, I guess, his prejudice from a much more implicit, much more hidden, kind of behind the scenes methodology.
Well, and he's also, in addition to that, Win is a classist, right? Like
Right.
Win's prejudice extends to class as well. So the scene that you're referring to in issue 2,
Mhm.
for folks watching, is a scene where Win Morgan, the villain, is talking to Sheldon Toole, who is kind of a leader of like what you would imagine the old boy system of this stuff would be like, right? Kind of represents like the kind of good old boy part of the movement.
Right.
But he's very, very elitist about how he deals with people. And and even in that issue, the character Billy makes note to Richard about how Jennifer never looks at him like that. Like Jennifer being Wynn's daughter, right? How they even Billy is aware. Billy's a skinhead that's working with this guy, who went to an event at Wynn's house and this whole thing. But there's a sense of class there, and that's why I witnessed when I talked to people in the movement directly. Is there is a classism that's within the movement, but every movement has it, right? It's like the Richard Spencers of the world. They don't want to be associated with the I forgot the guy. It's like a bald-headed Cantwell. I think it's Christopher Cantwell or something like that. They don't want to be associated with those guys,
right?
Because they're like, well, I cleaned up. I'm respectable. I have a college degree. And so what you really have is the veil of race used to cover up, which to me is really sort of like a class-based hierarchy.
And it even seems, I mean, I don't know. With reading this, I've always felt that it was a lot more, there were a lot of different angles integrated in this. Like it was very socio-political rather than just kind of stemming from, and again, this is all conjecture, just classism, just,
yeah, for sure. Because look, I don't think that a hardcore racist is going to be interested in reading a comic book about a guy going undercover to find out if racists killed an FBI agent, right? That's not the choir that this sermon's going to speak to.
Right.
And I would think that most people, and I believe that most people don't hold deep prejudice in their hearts. Look, we all have our own prejudices for various reasons,
Right.
There was a girl broke my heart when I was a kid. So, if I see someone that looks like them, not as nice, right?
Yeah, I guess.
So things happen, right?
I can't imagine the Obi-Wan of comics not being nice to anybody. But
well, I tell you what, it takes a lot to get to Obi-Wan.
Hey, listen, man, Obi-Wan told Anakin not to jump.
Yeah, it's true. It takes you have to make a lot of mistakes before you stop making them.
I guess so, yeah.
But yeah, like it's most, if not all, of what you see in American Carnage is based on real world research I've done and conversations I've had with people. And if the book was just racism is bad, the book, well, we all know that. Who doesn't know that?
A few of those
right?
over the years, have we not?
Yeah, like who doesn't know that? Like,
Right.
I guess people, yes, certain people don't know that, but they don't read a lot of comics, and they're not going to be reached by one.
Right.
And they're certainly not going to be reached by me. So that's not the battle I'm fighting. What I'm doing is saying, well, this is an interesting milieu in which to set a crime story, to put a protagonist through that kind of, literary version of hell that allows us to look at that world and then use it as an allegory for our own lives. Like, The Sopranos is a mob thing, but it's not about the mob, right? It's about family. It's about legacy. It's about escaping the karma of what you've caused in the world. The mob is just the veneer. And so in a lot of ways, American Carnage is the same way. That's why I think it's a universal book.
And the thing is, I don't know. I mean, I tend to consider myself personally a little bit more open-minded. I even go as far as to saying like I would identify more as like a moderate conservative.
Sure.
But reading this book, like I said, I think you do an excellent job at not particularly pointing fingers, but just kind of getting down to there are a lot of different things that both sides are doing wrong.
Well, I grew up in Missouri.
Right.
And I'm talking to you from Missouri right now because I'm back home. I still call it home, even though I've been in LA for like 7 years. But I'm back here for the holidays, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Missouri is an interesting state in which to grow up. I grew up in St. Louis, which is a bluish purple city inside of a pretty red state. And it was rare to be in any situation where everyone voted for the same person.
Mhm.
Like I was just in the Cheesecake Factory yesterday, eating a salad over there. That somehow was still like 1,100 calories, even though it was
I,
anyway.
I was just gonna say,
Anyway,
for someone who's writing a book called American Carnage, eating salad at a Cheesecake Factory sounds pretty un-American.
yeah, like and I mean I don't know how somehow the veggie burger was like 1,240 calories. Go figure.
Oh Jesus!
So yeah, like, what kind of vegetable? You know that like bacon grease isn't a vegetable anyway. So I was in the Cheesecake Factory and there was a table on my right that were pretty Trump, like Trump voters. I could tell from their conversation. A
Right.
table in front of me that were pretty far left. A table on the left of me that seemed kind of center left or center right. I couldn't really tell. Um, and that was the city in which I grew up.
Right.
I didn't grow up in New York or California or like Texas or someplace where you can sort of assume how everyone's going to kind of vote, right?
Right.
And I had political differences with people, but I also had similarities with people. Years ago when I was broke and I was still trying to forge my career, I used to write in a Starbucks that was up the street from my mother's house.
Mhm.
And there's a guy that lived in my neighborhood who, he had everything. He had the yellow "Don't Tread on Me" flag, the stitch to his house. He had the whole thing.
Mhm.
And I think he was intent on making me like a conservative. And we would have these discussions, but we would find common ground in certain things, right? We would be like, we would agree on certain things. And now that I live in California, uh, everyone is very polarized.
Mhm.
I mean, the good thing about it is there's kind of an unfettered ability to explore liberal ideas, which
Mhm.
I think is a good thing because if it's just theory and you never put it into practice, you don't really know what it's going to work, right? So I think sometimes it's good to have certain polarized regions of the country because you want to see what the legislation looks like when you actually do it. And then
Right.
if it doesn't work, now you can point to actual evidence rather than just like your imagination of what will take place.
Yeah, it's not as theoretical
It's
anymore.
not as theoretical, right? Like and there's a yin yang relationship between liberalism and conservatism that I think is very important for the country.
I
You know,
agree, and I think one of the biggest shames are, and I think I find both sides of the political spectrum at fault here is that this could just be the my perspective from my age range and demographic, but I feel
hmm
like there isn't a lot of room for calm political discourse anymore.
not at all. Like everything has to be incredibly polarized. You have to wear the right T-shirt, the right hat, say the right thing.
Right.
We've lost our ability to forgive,
Hmm.
and certain things don't deserve forgiveness, but certain things can be forgiven.
Right.
We've lost our patience for interpretation.
Yeah.
We sort of assume that whatever someone has done, if I'm taking it in the worst way possible, that had to be what they meant.
Right.
You know, when Vertigo came to me about doing a book for their launch, and I didn't have a magical realism book, and I thought that's what they wanted because it was Vertigo. I'm like, I don't have, the joke I use is I don't have like a guy who turns into a werewolf every time he sniffs cocaine. Like I don't, you
Yeah.
know, I don't have,
There's no talking streets.
yeah, I don't have that yet. I'm, one day, as the weed laws continue to get more lax, I'm sure one of those books will pop out for me at some point. But I was like, I do this crime thing, and it's about this stuff, and I don't know if the guys want to touch it. And they responded to it. And part of the reason why I wanted to write American Carnage is there's an old saying from politics that only Nixon could go to China because Nixon was so anti-communism that he had the ability to open China without people thinking that America was turning soft on communism.
Yeah.
And I feel with something like American Carnage, because I am an African American writer,
Mhm.
people won't assume that I mean what the racists say in the book.
That's true. That's
And
very
so,
true.
and I don't think about, look, I'm not a person that thinks about the race of a writer when I look at I don't think that way. But I just know how the world of social media takes content. I know how the discussions go. And I wanted to put something in popular culture that was deliberately stark. And I can do that because people won't look at me and be like, does he really think like win more? Obviously I don't, right?
Right. Right.
But
Well,
like
you
that's the
said
culture we're in.
you set a great precedent too, because I think that for people to assume the opposite is almost believable. Somebody would almost assume that, you know, being an African American writer, that you might approach this from a solely you know, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say like a total like sympathizer. I don't think that's the right word, but I think you understand what I'm saying. You know what I
Well,
mean?
yeah, well, I write human beings,
Right.
and
And
uh,
that's one thing that I like about this. It's very apparent that you write people, not race.
well, it's look when I would talk to people that were in these movements,
Hmm.
no one is born with this ideology. Now,
Hmm.
when we're young, we do recognize difference, and sometimes difference can take us aback for a second. But it's not a natural human instinct to just hate something because they're different. You might be a little wary at first, but then you open up, and then you get excited because you've opened up a new frontier. The guiding principle of humanity is opening up frontiers. That's what we do.
Right.
Humanity has never been isolationist by nature. We're just not isolationists. We always look to expand things and to go places, and that's how wars start and bad things can happen. But we are always looking for a new frontier. Uh, and I think part of the reason why we have an age where there's so much conflict is we've mapped out so much of our world now. We have lost so much of the magic in the world that we used to have.
Hmm.
Like previous generations, there was a lot of unknown, and now there is a lot of known.
Sure.
And humanity, I think, needs some kind of adversity to find its greatest nature. And when we don't have a lot of adversity, and in the West, we still live a relatively comfortable existence.
Hmm.
Um, I think sometimes we turn on each other because we just need that experience, right?
Hmm.
Um, and I was talking to a friend of mine. Whoever the president is, whether it's Democrat, Republican, Trump, or anybody else, now I think is when you want to like really focus on the space program.
Right.
Really focus on exploring the oceans. Really focus on like set an unattainable or not an unattainable goal, but like a goal that's difficult to attain, and give humanity a mission besides tearing itself apart.
Right. No, no, no. You
That's
make an excellent point.
because
Something kind of like productively distracting.
yeah, like something that we can focus on. Like let's solve this problem. Let's pick a problem and let's actually try to solve the problem.
Right.
Uh, and let's get thoughts from everywhere, and then see what we can do. But instead, we kind of find problems in each other, like little petty problems. But back to the book, yeah, people get to a place, and so when you encounter a person and they have an ideology that you find horrifying or monstrous or just deeply wrong,
Hmm.
no one's born with that ideology. So
Yeah.
to just engage the ideology and assume that's the whole of the person, well, you're basically looking at someone's manifestation of their own trauma.
Hmm.
And what I'm interested in is, well, where'd the trauma come from? What's the trauma? Like, why do you feel like this? Like, because this isn't inherent to people. And I could tell when I was talking to people one on one, you start looking somebody in the eye and you're patient with them, you're not insulting them. And even if they drop some racial slurs to see if they can trigger you, if you don't get triggered, eventually they just start talking to you.
Right.
And it might not happen instantly, but it's like Mindhunters, right? That David Fincher series.
Hmm.
The serial killers just start talking because humanity likes to express itself to other elements of humanity. That's
Right.
what we do, right?
Right.
So yeah, so like I like to write, whether it's like Batman or the work I'm doing with Outsiders. I can't tell you anything about it, but it's still about like human frailty and flaw and consequence and how we can get trapped in a prison constructed from our own karma. I mean, that's why the villain of Detective Comics in that run was named Karma,
Right.
because I wanted to kind of pose this idea of karma as individual, and um, having to sort of pay for the things that you've done, and how do you escape that? And in that story, if you remember, you know, it was Bruce's sadism that gave rise to the villain in the first place. Like he
Right.
found it, he encountered a man that he found awful. He found that man monstrous, and that man had done monstrous things. And because Bruce took a little sadistic pleasure in breaking that man's mind, that resulted in a villain that came to threaten the people that he cares about the most.
Yeah, no, and I thought that was a really interesting kind of lesson for Bruce to learn, especially at this point, with the marriage having happened, and how far he is in his journey as Batman versus how far he assumably was, during the flashback scenes. And you can definitely tell that, punishing for Batman is extremely cathartic. I mean, that's almost entirely what his motivation is, right?
Yeah.
It's catharsis by way of, justice, but more namely, I imagine he probably gets more of a release off of the physical punishment of the people that do wrong.
Yeah, and at some point you have to stop the cycle of suffering. If I was talking to Bruce Wayne, the question I would ask him is, do you want to fight criminals or do you want to fight crime?
Right.
Because they're not always the same thing.
Right.
It's like one of the things I appreciate about Daredevil, really, is that part of Daredevil would rather a world not need Daredevil. Like Matt would like it to work in the courtroom. He would prefer that it worked in the courtroom, but it doesn't. So he has to suit up, And if you look at Killmonger, like Killmonger is about a protagonist that has justified everything that he wants to do because he has suffered. And he has suffered greatly. So there is a perspective that you can understand with Eric. Eric like ripped away from his homeland as a kid, kind of exposed to all types of prejudice, having to figure himself out as this prodigal orphan bastard son, really. Like, you can get why he would feel like he was justified, but at some point, justified or not, we have to try to stop the cycle of aggression.
Right.
And
right. And I mean, even looking at that from the perspective of the Black Panther film, not to go too far off, but I think that's a lesson that T'Challa kind of had to learn.
totally.
Was that there was no right side. Both of the opposing ends had their faults, and it's finding the compromise between the two. And that's ultimately, what makes a flourishing, I guess more specific to the movie, a flourishing world society versus a flourishing society in the United States or in Wakanda separately.
Well, I was talking to a friend of mine. He's a military fella, and I have a lot of respect for him and the armed services in general. When you grow up in Missouri, you know a lot of people in the service, right?
Right.
And he was joking with me about, like, you should like run for president one day. And I'm like, man, I am too liberal and too not interested in war to run for president. And he's like, well, that's exactly the president I want. I want a president who's always trying to avoid war. So that when we're fighting a war, I know we're fighting a war for the right reasons, right? Because I have to deal with the sons and the daughters that don't come home, or they come home broken,
right.
In ways you can see, in ways you can't, right?
And I think even with that being said, sorry to interrupt, I've seen airs of little airs of that in American Carnage. That
sure,
like I've seen. I mean, again, this is conjecture. But I've seen a little bit of the, this is how we treat our soldiers when they come home from war. Like
that's in the Billy character, right?
Right.
Like, because I encountered people like that who had, they grew up in a small town. A lot of people that I've known, they joined the military because of the healthcare.
Right.
Maybe they've fallen in love, that, they had a baby on the way.
Right.
They didn't really have a way to pay for anything. It's very expensive to deliver a child.
And my generation is very much like the GI Bill for free education.
Totally, right? Like, so people got into it because of financial need, because they knew if they got into it, they'd have access to healthcare and these things. And then they go over there and they get torn apart and put back together again. And then they come over here and they struggle, right? And I think not to like get into like policy or anything, but I am very concerned about how we treat veterans.
I agree.
These days, right? I with all the money that we have, you would think that a veteran could come back from war and not. I mean, you talk about like universal basic income. You talk about like raising the minimum wage and all that stuff. If there's any part of society that deserves to come back and be relieved of at least the fear of poverty, it's a veteran.
I agree with you 100%.
Right? And I'm not saying they come back and you give them like $200,000 a year. Right. I'm just saying there's no reason why a veteran should come back and worry about having a roof over their head.
Right. They should. I mean, I agree. They should be given the tools to succeed. And one of the things is, especially for those who are in combat or in the infantry, the entirety of their career and their life while they're overseas is, being tactical, trying to survive, and in many cases killing another man or multiple other men. And when you come back home, really, what jobs are out there for you when your entire life was, in the most extreme of extremes? And I think that's one of the biggest issues is that, for people that are like that and are fully combat veterans, you don't have any real life training.
Yeah, it's a shame. We have our disagreements about policy, and we hold politicians accountable for maybe starting conflicts or profiting off of conflicts or whatever. But then too often we extend that to the people that have to fight these conflicts. And a lot of those people, not a lot, I won't say that. That's a mistake. But some of these individuals, because they're in these desperate circumstances, because they're not getting just not even respect, just a recognition of the sacrifice that they have to make, they can be susceptible to influence, to being brought into negative points of view. I mean, if you look at the suicide rates that veterans go through, that should alarm all of us.
Right. I agree with you. 100%.
Like it just, and I'm liberal, man. I am like a granola eating, like I'm a snowflake of the snowflakes, right?
Salad,
but like
salad at
I
Cheesecake
had
Factory.
salad at Cheesecake Factory, right? Like I'm that dude, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's just there are certain things that are just kind of true in a humanist way, and American Carnage is really about how society has failed a lot of us, whether you're white, black, female, male, right? Like it's about how we're sort of failed by not only the system that we have, but we're also failed by those who seek to profit off of the conflict that we live in.
And it's interesting because the thing I like about American Carnage is while it's juxtaposed against like the American idealism, this is also like this juxtaposition is solely for the purpose of trying to find some semblance of the American idealism again and being able to inhabit that, right? I mean,
well, it's in a way, it's like quintessentially American, right?
right, right.
Like Richard is a son of America.
And
because he is a mixed race guy who has both been a member of authority as a former FBI agent, but he's also been on the skids, right? So Richard to me kind of represents a lot of America. And there's a line in the first issue, when he's like, I don't like the idea of spying on a private citizen just because he writes books you don't like.
Right.
Right? Like, you know what I mean? And that's a thing. Like, yes, this guy might be bad and his organization might be insidious, but are you willing to just forget civil rights?
Yeah.
Forget it?
Yeah.
Because what happens? How do you stop that? Right? When do you decide it's too far? Right? Just people you don't like, it's cool. You know? And so yeah, and to me, even the conflict, man, like when people yell at me on Twitter about it, and to be honest, I don't get a lot of yelling, but when certain people yell at me or someone's going to make a YouTube and they're going to call me this or that, to me, that's America. Is my ability and freedom to write that book, their ability and freedom to hate the fact that I wrote that book. We can each express ourselves. Like to me, American Carnage in a lot of ways is a celebration of what matters about our society and our system, the fact that these works can exist, and if someone's really irritated about it and they want an essay about me, or they have a soliloquy they want to deliver on YouTube, go ahead, man, because that's we that's the conversation. I don't fear the conversation. I like the conversation. No one ever invites me to the YouTubes where they're yelling at me, but but
yeah,
I do. I enjoy the thing of it, So, it's not some screed against this moment in time. It's certainly not a book made to mock a specific, politician. I'll just say, because that would just date it. Because 15 years from now, you don't. I mean, you don't. And to me, that's the whole point of it. Like, if you make your thing too specific to one individual in the moment, right? Then in 15 years from now, your work might not be relevant because no one will know what you're talking about.
Right.
Like, oh, what are you talking about?
Well, I also feel like too, the concepts that you're working with are very forward thinking. I mean, again, one of the things that I've noticed that dealing with geez, the politician, what's his name?
When
He, no, when
in
I
the
thought
book?
when he gave the speech at the chapel.
Yeah, that's Win Morgan.
Morgan. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I thought you said Went because I feel like there was a
No,
Went in there.
no. When is his first name? Morgan is his last name.
Right. So when Morgan is very much approaching, his prejudice and his discrimination via, system. It's systematic prejudice, systematic racism, systematic classism, and a number of other things. And it's like, if you look at that versus, for example, something like an old slavery piece, an old American slavery piece, that dates it, right? Because that eventually led into the system that Win Morgan is now playing off of and is continuing to try to perpetuate.
Well,
But I
that's
feel
what
like,
villains do, right? Like
right,
part of what Win likes to do is to get as many people to agree with him as he can, despite the ultimate nature of his belief system.
right,
And a lot of people like that scene when Win is talking in that church. Because if for people watching, the antagonist of the book, who was kind of like a shadow character, we don't quite know how corrupt or crazy he might be, is introduced speaking to a black church, and he is a white man who identifies as libertarian. And yes, I know libertarians are not all racist. Don't find me on Twitter. It's a character in a book. That's what he says. It's what Wynn says. That doesn't mean it's real. It's not gospel. Um, but he's giving a speech, and he's talking about the common denominator really between his viewpoint and a lot of people's viewpoints across a socio kind of ethnic cultural spectrum. And they don't know whether or not he's a card carrying bigot, but some of those ideas resonate with some of the people in that room. And, uh, I like the messiness of life, man. I like, going back to Detective Comics and Karma, he's an awful guy that you can kind of feel sorry for, but you also know has to be stopped. But you don't really win anything if you just beat the shit out of him.
right. Well, and
And
I
it's
mean,
messy.
you approach that in issue two, even with the
Yeah,
pool scene.
yeah, yeah. It's just like what? Okay, so you beat him up. When you beat somebody up, like I've been in fights before, and I'm
Right.
not the smallest guy, and I've won some fights, lost some fights. I didn't feel great after I won a fight. I didn't feel great after I lost a fight. You always feel a little bit like a donkey for even getting involved into a fight.
Not
You
gonna
know.
lie though, reading the fight in the book was kind of fun.
Well, yes. Well, some, and that's the thing. Like, but you do get the catharsis, right? So, like, you know, there's always multiple ways to look at sort of anything. In Killmonger, it's a lot of the same stuff. Well, like you can understand where Eric comes from. You can also not want him to do what he's doing.
Mhm.
Like when Bast speaks to Eric and says, "I don't want you to do this. I want you to do that." Like Bast is like the Wakandan, kind of god based
Yeah.
on the Egyptian god Bast.
Right.
And Eric rejects, the wisdom. Part of you was like, well, you should listen. Part of you was like, no, kind of reject it. And I enjoy the complications and the messiness of the human spirit. Just the ways that we contradict ourselves, the ways that we don't make sense.
Mhm.
Um, uh, like I remember when I was a kid and I was watching documentaries. And sometimes like back in the day, Discovery Channel, History Channel, it would just be all Nazis all the time, right?
Right.
They were at 10 a.m. They were going after the Spear of Destiny, and at like 2 o'clock they were, it's like Ark of the Covenant and all that. And they'd have these like home movies of Hitler and his like I guess it was his Swiss villa or whatever his German, I don't even know where it was.
Mhm.
And he's like playing with a dog. And it makes you remember that like he's a guy that played with the dog too, right? Like it's in stories we tend to have characters that just wake up in the morning, they eat their evil cornflakes,
Evil cornflakes.
they turn on their evil radio station, they sing along to their favorite evil song, and then they just get down, open up a sketchbook, and draw a fist with bats flying around it. And that's not people, man. Like Like monsters can be the person next door that you can relate to. You just don't understand how they're monstrous, and so that duality and that dimensionality that can be terrifying is something that I like to explore in the work. Outsiders is full of that kind of stuff. You know, it's it's a book that, yes, one is still coming out. Two, I will be able to talk about in detail soon.
Good.
But three is about the kind of different ways a person can look at a situation, you know, and how both people can be right. You know, that relationship between Bruce and Jefferson Pierce is very important
I really
to
like that
me.
dynamic, by the way.
Well, yeah, because they both look at things different ways, and they both have reasons to look at things different ways, and they each have a unique experience the other doesn't have, right? So, so there are things that Bruce knows that Jefferson doesn't know. There are things that Jefferson knows that Bruce doesn't know, and it's, you know, it's like we were talking about earlier about that yin yang relationship between forces. You kind of need you need the opposing forces so that you can find that harmony that comes from those forces working in concert. And so, yeah, so Batman and the Outsiders is a lot about how that works, and you know how what is Jefferson going to learn from Bruce and apply, and what is Bruce going to learn from Jefferson and apply, and you have these other characters that are caught in the middle, right?
And
So
also regarding
yeah,
Batman and the Outsiders, do we know if it's like a mini, maxi, or an ongoing series yet?
I'm approaching it as an ongoing,
Hmm.
and I've mapped out at least 12 issues of it. I'm not sure if it's going to be shipping bi-monthly or not. Probably won't. Probably be monthly.
Oh, wow.
Um, so I'm approaching it as an ongoing, and I think DC is approaching it as an ongoing. We'll see if there's an appetite for it. You know,
Listen.
there's a lot of bat books out there.
No, there
So
are. I mean, I'm more than happy to see you on an ongoing Bat book. I mean, I enjoy your writing generally. I really enjoyed, what you were building towards in Detective Comics a lot. We last time we spoke, we talked at length about karma and a lot of the angles you try to approach with like the thematics and such.
yeah, yeah.
Karma was very multi-layered and how that affected Bruce. Especially this far into his career, I think was a really important thing to explore.
Well,
So, I mean, I'm excited. Not to mention, I mean, freaking Dexter Soy on art. That's
yeah, he's phenomenal, right? Like, I mean, I wish I could show you some of the stuff he's doing. It's incredible. Well, first, thank you for saying that. That's really kind. Look, it is when you're writing Batman, it's hard to get the ghost of Scott and Tom and Frank, uh, and Tomasi,
oh man,
you
I
know,
love Tomasi. I think
you
it's so
know,
underrated.
you're like out of. I mean, they're hovering over you, and you're really trying to figure out what can I do that is unique, but still something I think fans of Batman will appreciate. And going back to the fun thing I was talking about before, I've been such a Batman fan. Like I'm in my family home now, and I could go down to my basement and I can get the scrapbook where I still have the ticket stubs from the 1989 Batman that I saw twice in one day. Right.
That's awesome.
Um, so I have such a love of the character and a deep identification with the character that I feel like even when I play and I do things, I never lose what is essentially Batman. And with Jefferson Pierce, um, I'm trying to add certain dimension that again talking about frontiers, he has a lot of frontiers to explore, and that's interesting. And characters like Cassandra Cain, I've been a huge Cassandra Cain fan for a long time. Really since the Damian Scott, Puckett work back in like Silent Running. I just thought that was one of the additions to the DC universe that instantly made sense to me. Sure, of course, she turns up in Gotham, and of course, Batman works with her.
I mean, one thing I'm also really excited, and I imagine you're going to explore is her. I think her relationship with Bruce is really, really unique because this for me was the first time that I think like Bruce has a real daughter figure.
Totally.
Barbara was more like the niece. You know what I mean to me, because she had Jim.
Well,
Jim was always a great dad, and Bruce always admired Jim. But with especially in current continuity, with David being dead and Shiva, being Shiva, I feel
right.
like this is a great way to explore because we've gotten a little bit of I mean, we've gotten a lot with Bruce and the surrogate sons, but this is the first time I think dealing with a surrogate daughter. So I'm really excited to see, where you're going to go with that.
Yeah, well, there's that moment in My Detective Run when Bruce is going after Carmel alone, and then he finds that orphan Cassandra Cain has broken the kind of the agreement and shown up to help, but he knows how capable she is. So
Right.
instead of like scolding her, he's just like, all right, well, since you're here, get to work, right?
Yeah, I feel
And
like he had to have known it was going to happen, regardless,
totally, right?
going into it.
And part of what makes their relationship unique is there are elements to Bruce Wayne that I think only Cassandra can understand,
Hmm.
because he has studied so many things and had so many intense experiences, and does have a killer that can live within him. He just doesn't let that killer out.
Right.
And in a way, they have this unique understanding, and that's something I really enjoy exploring.
Right.
And people have, traditionally people treated Cassandra Cain as she's dangerous, she's unstable, we don't really know if she's gonna be good or bad. And I look at her like, because she has dealt with those aspects of herself, openly and terrifyingly and honestly, you
Hmm.
know, she has reconciled things that a lot of people have yet to reconcile, and that's what makes Duke kind of interesting,
Hmm.
because Duke hasn't confronted himself really,
Hmm.
and that leaves a lot of space for choices to be made. I never fear the person that has been. I feel the person that hasn't yet been.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
No.
Because they can still get surprised by themselves in a way that I'm not sure Cassandra can.
No.
Um,
That's a great way to go about it.
so yeah, so like it's gonna be a cool book. I have to get out of here.
Okay.
I just looked at the clock, and I have some family, pre-Christmas stuff to do.
Okay. Yeah.
But I really enjoyed the conversation, man. And
No. Yeah.
I guess when the next time I have something new dropping, I'm happy to come back.
Yeah. I'd be more than happy to have you on. Do you mind if I just read a couple people in the chat? Just had a couple things to
Oh,
say.
sure. There's questions. Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
yeah. I've got like 10 minutes for questions. So let's
Sure.
do that.
Sure.
I can't see the chat. Sorry about that.
No.
Sorry
No.
about that,
No.
chat guys. I will answer your questions now.
It's all right. Yeah. So, some Okie Dude just says Merry Christmas to the both of us. So
Oh,
that,
hey, some Okie. Yeah, man. That's a Twitter pal. How you doing, man? Merry Christmas to you too.
yeah. Merry Christmas, man. Thanks for stopping by to listen to us chat. Let's see here. JT Gamer also says Merry Christmas.
Hey, Merry Christmas, JT.
And then Lameworks, I'm beyond excited for Outsiders by Bryan. I agree. I can echo that sentiment.
Right on. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm sorry I'm so cagey about it, but I really can't share any details. But the moment I can start talking about it, I'm gonna be talking about it a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
I'm not gonna lie. I was pretty bummed when I heard it was getting moved. I was like, oh man. I
well,
mean,
yeah, that had less to do with that book and more to do with just integrating it into what's going on with the DCU.
yeah.
There's a lot of big moves that are happening right
I
now.
I figured. I mean, there feels like, which is a little bit awkward in ways. I feel like there are three big hands at work with the landscape of the DC universe. You have Jeff Johns and Doomsday Clock. You have Scott with Justice League, and it looks like Bendis is kind of moving a lot of pieces over with Superman. So
Well, and the great thing is, you know, if DC cares enough about Outsiders uh, in rhythm with all of these things that are happening, they care enough about the book to want the book to be, kind of a major thing in the DCU, which is great, right? Like you'd rather have them want to make sure that certain events are being reflected in just the world space of the book. Like,
right,
no one's making me start the story over. No one's making me change major plot elements. It's not that. It's none of that. It's just making sure that certain things have been reflected, kind of in the world state, because we want a continuous universe.
right,
And I'm a guy that's used to either writing independent books that have their own contained continuity, or miniseries that have like light relationships to continuity, right? Like, I'm still getting my continuity legs together under me as well.
hmm,
But it's good that they care about the project, to want to make sure that it feels like it's part of the pantheon of what they're doing. So
Yeah.
thank you for the interest in the book, and I can't wait to share it with you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, 100%. I mean, what you're doing in all your other books, and then obviously the more explicit work in Detective Comics, where you touched all of these characters that you're going to be playing with for the most part. Um, I see a very positive, or I guess a really appealing, story to read with appealing characters where there are things to be learned and new places to go. And I think that a lot of people are seeing that, Bryan. So.
Well, yeah, and I've gotten so much just great like positive reinforcement from readers really around the world, and it's humbling, and I appreciate all of it. Like I read all the tweets. If you DM me, I will DM you back. It might take me a little bit because I get a lot of DMs because I keep them open, but I get back to everybody eventually. So
Right.
just I thank everyone. I can't see the chat right now because I'm on my phone. I'm in Missouri, guys, and my internet here is spotty, so I had to do this on my cell phone. So I can't see the chat, but um, I'll still answer whatever questions that are there. But I just
Yeah.
want to tell all you guys that I really appreciate all the time and attention that you've given me.
No, I mean, and we appreciate how candid and appreciative you are of your fans. Um, Obviously, there's that, and that's a big added bonus, I guess, to creators. Sometimes comics, and very actually more often times, comics is one of those mediums where you don't get a lot of exposure to the creator beyond
Yeah,
what
yeah.
they write, in a book or beyond what they draw in a book. But I think, it's rewarding to be a fan of yours because of how you treat us and how you treat people in general.
Well, I mean, like recently, there's a comic book store here in St. Louis called Star Clipper. That is downtown, and it's in downtown St. Louis now, but it was a little more central when I was growing up, and that was where I bought my books. And I saved up my allowance, and I bought my comics, and that was like a thing. That was comics in a lot of ways. I think they were like the first things I bought with my own money.
Hmm.
Where I bought it, with my allowance or mowing lawns or whatever. And so you have a special relationship to that. And I saw recently they posted something about American Carnage and why they thought people should read the book. And I'm not even sure they know that I'm from St. Louis.
Hmm.
I don't think they maybe made the connection, with the name. But when you can have a full circle life moment like that,
Yeah.
I'm like a mile and a half away from the library that I would go and check out trade paperbacks because I just didn't have enough money growing up to buy all the comics I wanted, so I had to wait for the libraries to get them.
Hmm.
And I would go there and I get really excited when they had a new trade in, and that's all I read, Batman and Vertigo and everything else I was reading. And to have a trade paperback in the library,
Hmm.
that's a huge thing. Like that's and I wouldn't get that experience if it wasn't for people who spend their money and their time on my work.
Right.
And it doesn't matter what I'm doing. I mean, I could make a $400 million movie that makes $3 billion. I'm always going to appreciate all of it because I know what it's like to be on that side of wanting to know a little more about a creator, and wanting to, just check in and say, hey, I like the stuff, or hey, I didn't like the stuff, or whatever it is. And
Right.
I'd never want to. My mission in social media and when I make public appearances, I don't do a lot of public appearances because I'm busy all the time.
Hmm.
But my mission when I do them is to never give someone a shitty Bryan Hill experience. Right?
No, that's
Like
fair.
I don't want to do that. Like, I can do that I'll do that with my wife because she has to deal with it because she's married to me. but
Fair.
like I don't want to do that to anyone that comes up at a table or like finds me on social media. Because the last thing I'd ever want to do is make someone's day worse.
No, yeah. I mean, I can't think of quite the appropriate positive response to that, but it's endearing. It's a really endearing character trait, Bryan. I'll kind of try to lightning round through some of these questions.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I'll answer. I'll go through all the questions. I'll answer. I will not leave until I've answered the questions.
Jeez. One of them being someone wants to know what's what's the stop issue for American Carnage? Is it 5, 6, or are we getting maxi?
Oh yeah, well okay, so I tend to when I first do my outlines for things, I tend to always have 12 in mind, right? With notes for more if there's appetite for the story.
Mm-hmm.
So with American Carnage, I had a 12 issue kind of story sort of laid out already with potential for it to continue.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the reason I called the book American Carnage instead of calling it like Evil Wacists is I wanted to have like an umbrella title that I could use to explore multiple aspects of things going on, right? So, like maybe maybe after 12 issues, some of the characters will move on into another story in another world, and phases will change. And if you look at like arcs of seasons and all that, I think the book does a very good job of evolving every issue and surprising things. So yeah, I'm happy to write that book as long as people want to read that book. But I would say to definitely expect at least 12 of American Carnage.
That's awesome. I'll definitely be picking it up all the way. I think I now own 2 copies of issue 1 and 2 copies of issue 2.
Oh, right on. Well, I've seen them go on eBay for like a lot of money, and I feel bad like when the speculators get into the market. But
Well, I mean, I did it well because I try to support local stores and I try to support good work. So I have a couple copies of that. I also got a couple copies of Tomasi's first issue on Detective, which was
oh yeah, I mean Peter coming back is a great thing. He's one of the nicest guys in the world. Peter is so great.
he's so good. Let me just say, man, there are 3 guys that are working for DC right now that I think are criminally underrated, and it's Pete, Rob Venditti, and yourself.
Oh yeah, Robert is amazing. Like
So
like he has an amazing mind. I was at that DC Writer Summit they do earlier this year, and to hear Robert talk about storytelling and
so
just
good.
to see the layers of his mind work, it's incredibly impressive.
Dude, I've had such a great pleasure. I've gotten to chat with both Venditti and Tomasi over interviews. Unfortunately, Venditti was short because it was via DC, and they're
Sure.
very
Oh yeah, well big the publicity had I have to hustle you around.
right. But getting to chat with them, it, I it's almost like I don't understand why they aren't like the big names in comics. You know what I mean? I think they're just criminally underrated, and I mean I think like the last month going into the last issue of Detective, this week, the week of, like, I was just chanting and chanting and chanting for Detective 994 by like
Yeah.
I'm like, you guys need to buy this. Like, this book is like, you need to support this. You need to support the artwork. You need to support the writing. You need to support this voice in the industry. And Robin did, like, I don't know if you're reading it, and I know, like, doing what you do, there's not a lot of time to read your peers' work, but frick it, man, Hawkman by
Oh
Venditti
yeah,
right
no, I
now.
checked it out. Like after hearing him speak about his work, I was like, yeah, I gotta check this guy's work out. And I think with Peter and Rob, um, and a lot of people, there's a lot of like great writers in comics that I think are underrated. Like I think Ben Percy is a fantastic writer that people should pay more attention to. And there's a whole host of people. I almost started naming people. So I'm going to leave someone out and make someone mad, but
Right, yeah.
but yeah, and that's sort of the I don't know when a person tips in culture. I don't know what project does it really, and it's just something you can't really think about. You just do the best work you can and you put the work out there, and you never know what's going to be that thing or that issue or that moment that you do that's going to suddenly evolve you into that stage. But both of those guys, speaking of Peter and Rob, are so consistent with putting out quality work that I think it's inevitable that they're going to be, kind of on that mountaintop sooner than later.
Yeah, no, they're incredible, incredible, incredible storytellers. And coattailing off of that, you mentioned being at the Writer Summit, Nerdy Blurb TV. Brian, thanks for coming back on. And he says, question:
Hmm.
how is the work environment and workflow at DC? Do you work home mostly and alone, or is it different?
Well, I work at home mostly because I do a lot of different things, right? So when I'm not on hiatus, I'm in a writer's room on a television show Monday through Friday. So those are my days. And then I do my comic writing and my screenwriting and like my other artistic pursuits. I do those things at night and on the weekends. So I do most of my work alone. Sometimes I'll go in and speak with the editors because DC is in LA and I live in LA, so I can go there and and I might just kind of talk through a story with like in Detective it was Chris Conroy and Dave Weiglos were my editors in that book, so I talked through with them about it. In American Carnage, it's Andy Corey and Mark Doyle and Margarita over at Vertigo.
Mhm.
So yeah, I do most of the work alone. But comic creators we're kind of all over the world, really. We've got folks that are living in Europe, American Midwest, the South, the LAs and the New Yorks of everything, and we tend to be pretty open with each other digitally.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of times when I'll reach out to someone and say, "Hey, I'm having a problem. I don't really know how to solve this thing, or who are my two solutions? I'm not sure which one to go with. What do you think resonates more?" And I'll reach out to Scott Snyder a lot, and he's been very helpful. Tom King has been very helpful, uh, because I think a lot of us we spend a lot of time in front of our computers, kind of in our home offices, and we appreciate having the digital connections that we can make, with other people. So yeah, I tend to do a lot of my work kind of alone. Specifically, I write with incense and candlelight because I like to create a whole little mood, a little atmosphere.
Also,
Um,
you were talking about last time how you had like a little side bed sheet for when you get to write Batman.
oh yeah, you have to dress up like Batman when you write Batman, or he does not come out. Right, it's critical. So yeah, I have no shame. I will put the bed sheet on. I'll wrap it around my shoulders because I like to do like kind of almost like a Norm Breyfogle, like McFarlane cape.
I
That
like that.
that's like a little too long, like so. And I'll crouch on my chair,
Oh my
because
God.
the chair will be the rooftop, and you put the sheet around your shoulders, and you crouch, and you put your hand on the edge of the chair seat, and then you sort of like do the 3-point stance, and you let the sheet hang down, and then you imagine you're hearing the screams like wafting up from Gotham,
Yeah.
and like yeah, and I'll just act. But I act out most of my comics.
What
Like,
do I need to do to get a photo of you doing that for the thumbnail for our next
oh, you gotta add my wife on Twitter, and then you have to conspire with her because I will never allow you to do it. But she might sneak. She's a photographer, so she might sneak a photograph of me.
Oh, we're gonna talk about that.
Yeah, like I act out all the stuff that I do because and that's an old like screenwriting habit of mine is I need to hear it, and so I will sometimes it's just me like sitting in a chair just reading it out loud, making sure it sounds right, and then sometimes I'll actually just sort of act out the scene a little bit, like imagine the character that's on the page and read the dialogue that's there. It helps me make my dialogue more organic, and of course I look schizophrenic when I do it, but small price to pay for you guys.
Right. Let's see. We got one more question. Smoky Dude asks, have you seen Scalped? Did it influence your approach to American Carnage at all? Do you like it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I told Jason a couple years ago. There's an issue of Scalped, and I forgot the number. It might be like 74 or something. It's a single issue, and the story is about this Native American couple on the reservation that's very poor, and they're trying to figure out a cure for poverty, for their own poverty. And it kind of takes them through the seasons of this, and it talks about the experience of their poverty in a very like, boots on the ground, relatable way, just like not having enough money to eat and loving a person with all your heart, but not being able to take care of them, and then also feeling guilty because a person loves you with all of their heart, and feels bad about taking care of you, and you wish you could take care of all of us. So they didn't have to feel that way, and it's a beautiful tragic, moving story. And that issue, it still like left a real impression on me. And I'll go back and I'll reread it. And I don't know the number of it because it's the only issue of Scalped that I have digitally. I have a lot of them physically that are here, but they're all badged and boarded. But I made a special effort to purchase that one again digitally and have it available on my iPad. So when I need it, I have it.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, so like Jason's work is a big influence on me. I think we all know how good of a writer Jason Aaron is. So that's not news to the world. But his work mattered to me when I needed it because when I was reading Scalped, I didn't have a career. I didn't know if I was going to have a career. I mean, I kind of hoped I would, and you have to believe in yourself, but you still have the same fears and the rest of it, and I was going through a lot of what those characters are going through. So yeah, Scalped in the way it's organized is a big influence. I think obviously 100 Bullets is a big influence on American Carnage. You can see a lot of that, and the Leandro Fernandez. He's a very different artist, but there is the same sort of feeling you can get from his work that you might get from Rizzo at times.
I was thinking the same thing. Yeah, that was because I was like, when I first saw the A cover art, I think it's Churchill, right? Churchill's doing your.
Dean White's doing the colors, and Ben Oliver's doing the covers.
Oh, Ben Oliver, that's it.
Yeah. So Dean does colors, and Ben Oliver does, and Ben's awesome. Like Ben.
These are incredible. I have for some reason think I don't know, maybe it was just ignorant comic fan, knowing that this was like the A cover. I was like, oh, this must be the internals, and I looked and I was like, I mean the styles are really different, but I was like, wait a minute, like this guy is very Eduardo Rizzo. Like this is
Leandro,
like 100 Bullets kind of vibe.
He's really great, and when I first mentioned it to Andy before we talked artists, I had brought up, because before people start bringing up artists and all that, I never know who's available or whatever. So I usually just talk like genres and styles. And when I was writing it, I had like a Mitch Gerard's style in my head, very like realistic, almost photorealistic in some ways, very literal style. And I love Mitch's work because Sheriff of Babylon is or Sheriff Baghdad, whatever, which one. I always confuse it and call it Babylon, whatever. Sheriff of Babylon or Baghdad, whatever.
No, you got it right. It's Babylon.
Babylon. Also big influence. And so I was thinking that, and then Andy's like, well, what do you think about Leandro? And one, I didn't think he was available because like he's working on so many things. I was like, oh, he's available? Well, then definitely. But even more so when I saw his work come back, I realized that I was wrong. Because if American Carnage was in a purely literal style, I think it would just be too much. I think it would just be too much, too grim, dark of an experience. And the way Leandro can capture the essence of a character with less lines, and give you, this kind of archetypal idea of what someone is visually. I think it allows that book to feel very much like our world, but also kind of through a threshold into another. Which to me is like the essence of what a Vertigo book should be. I mean, if you look at 100 Bullets, it's very grounded in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, it has like almost magical realism fantasy kind of going on in it, right? Yeah. So like that era, long-winded answer to the question. Yes, Scalp's an influence. So is 100 Bullets, and so is Azzarello's other kind of less talked about work, Loveless, that he did with I think Rizzo did the first trade's worth of that, and then Marcelo Fruzen, I believe, came in and did the second trade. I'm a huge fan of Loveless, and it doesn't get a lot of talk, but I recently read it after I played Red Dead Redemption 2, because I had cowboys on the mind, and I loved the single player of Red Dead Redemption 2, even though Arthur moves like molasses, but whatever. But Rockstar, even with the Rockstar movement and the auto lock and the weird like game design that won't let you step 2 feet off of whatever scripted path they have you on. The writing in that game is and the vocal performances, I think, are the best I've ever seen in a video game. So after that was over, I was like, well, I need some more Western, and fired up Loveless and did that. And also Sheriff of Babylon and Tom's work. Minimalism.
Azzarello, I think, is one of those guys that gets overlooked. I don't know if you've read he had a small stint in like the 620s on Batman.
Oh yeah, I've read his Batman for sure.
Broken City. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, Broken City is great. And, his Luthor book with Bermejo is really strong, and I was a big fan of his Hellblazer run. And in his Hellblazer run, he had John Constantine encounter kind of like a militia type organization in that. And although our stories are very different and the way we're approaching character is very different, I did certainly look at Bryan's work and reference that. And I've met Bryan a few times, and I've been very grateful to be able to express to him how much I'm a fan of his stuff. And he's kind of grumpy about it, but he takes my compliments no matter what. So
he is. It was really funny. I feel like he like almost he seems really rigid, but I feel like he takes what people say to heart. Like quick thing in New York Comic Con, obviously Batman Damned came out,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and it was huge both because of controversy and because it was a fantastic book.
yeah.
And me being a fan of both Bryan Edward Hill and Lee Bermejo, I went up to get signed, and he knew that a lot of people were getting it signed so that they could flip it because it was worth money. And he
Right.
was charging, like $25 a signature. And I went up to him and was like, "Hey man, like I'm a big fan of your Batman Broken City." And I started talking to him about it. I was like, "I love how you're dealing so much with like the obsession and the trauma of Batman because it's something that I feel like people kind of graze over." And got into a conversation. He looks at like his manager through like comic sketch art, or the guy's like, "Charge this guy 5 instead of 25." I was like, "Oh, okay." Like, thanks.
Yeah, as Azarello, I really like him, and I don't know him very well, but I've consistently gotten honesty from him. He's a very kind of forthright person, and I admire that about someone.
Mhm.
And and look, I like the writers I admire to have a little edge. It kind of makes the experience of reading the work a little better. I mean, it would be weird to meet Brian Azzarello and have him be all rainbows and butterflies, right? Like,
Right.
you know, you,
Especially like looking at like the content of his writing.
yeah, like you kind of, you want it's like he's like a Dashiell Hammett kind of writer, or like a Hemingway-esque sort of figure. You want a guy that's going to tell you you're not drinking the right stuff and you should stand up straighter, right?
Mhm.
So, but he's a great guy. His work is a big influence. I mean, most of my influences I wear on my sleeve, Oki. So, if you're wondering, you're probably right.
Final question of the evening.
Yeah.
So you've had the experience of working for Big Two, imprint, and independent. So question is, working because you work for DC, Marvel, now Vertigo, which is like
Mm.
a side publishing, and full independent. What is that like? Like, what are the differences for you? Because I know like a lot of people, there's a common misconception that Vertigo is entirely creator owned. Um, so
Oh yeah. Well,
so
when
yeah, if you
you
had
mean
to like
like what's it like in what way? Like creatively or
creatively, and I guess yes, creatively, but also I guess the different middlemen you have to deal with, because obviously with
oh, well, I'll tell you, it's weird. Like I don't think everyone has the same experience, but with DC, whether it's been Vertigo or the DCU stuff I've done, I've gotten a lot of freedom
Mhm.
to create, and anytime I've gotten like a note or something, it was in service of what I was trying to do. And when I was starting Detective, I remember I turned in a script for the first issue, and I got some notes from Chris Conroy about it, and I was feeling sort of shaky about my ability to write superhero comics because I was coming off of Postal and I was working on Titans at the time, but I just didn't really feel like I had it really. And Chris did a lot of, I mean, to his credit, he's very patient with emotional writers who suddenly start beating themselves up about what they've missed the mark on. But he was like super helpful, and he's become a good friend over that process, and he certainly made my work better. And with Vertigo, Andy and Mark and Margarita Howell over there, uh, they've been nothing but supportive. And I make bold moves in American Carnage. I make a
Yeah,
lot of choices. It's a violent book. It's violent psychologically. It's violent physically. It's violent spiritually. We're going to get into some
emotionally, yeah.
spiritualism, before the story is done. We're going to go to some weird esoteric places too.
Mhm.
So yeah, they've been very supportive of it all. I've been lucky that whether it's working with Matt Hawkins at Top Cow on Postal for a number of years, or working with Marvel Killmonger, I haven't gotten a lot of headwind about the things I want to do. So I've had a really fine experience kind of across the board with creator owned work, as it were, or DCU work. I mean, I'm a screenwriter, so I'm used to getting beaten up all the time.
Yeah.
And yeah, so comics has not been that experience really at all.
Oh, that's really interesting because I feel like, there is a lot of confusion when it goes from, working, even just DC versus Vertigo and then Vertigo to independent.
Well, yeah, there's, yeah, and look, people can have different experiences based on the things they want to do. So you never know, but I'm cognizant of the fact that when you're working on like a universe title, you have to serve the needs of the universe, too. Like you can't just do something that's interesting to you that's going to break somebody else's book, right? Like you have to kind of think about your work in a unique, singular way, and also how it is part of this larger organism that is the thing. Same thing with Killmonger. Like, I can make a lot of choices because I created some characters, and I can do with those characters what I will. But certain characters are going to have to exist in a recognizable form after the events of those 5 issues, because they do exist in a recognizable form after the events of those 5 issues, right? So like, yeah, that's part of it. And maybe because I work in Hollywood too, and I'm a screenwriter and I work in TV, and I'm just used to the notes and the drafting, all of it, it might not bother me as much as it could bother someone else. I imagine it's probably difficult for someone that comes from novels into comics, because novels, you have a little more sovereignty, I imagine.
Right.
I've never published one, but I would think that you probably have a little bit more sovereignty there. But yeah, and I would tell anyone who's thinking about working in any sort of like submission, evaluation, artistic work gets returned to you for second round profession, whatever that could be, the more communication, the better. The better relationship you have with whoever is evaluating your work, the easier that process is going to be. And also, be honest from the beginning. This is a really important bit of advice. If you know you want to do something bold, don't wait until you're in a fine professional situation on a project and then come up with the bold thing. Lead with the bold thing. Because usually what will happen, even if someone doesn't want you to do that, because you led with it, you've given them more time to consider it.
Mm.
If you sort of like kind of hide it in your back pocket and, well, I'll wait for this process to evolve a little bit and then I'll bring it to them, I find that that's a bit more of a shock to the system. And I think it's always best to lead with the thing. Like, one of the things I tell people sometimes is, I'm gonna pitch something to you, and it's gonna make you not want to hire me, but I'm gonna be honest about it. Like this is the conversation that gets me fired, right? But when you do that, people know, like, okay, I'm not waiting for something else to happen. You're telling me what you want to do up front, and we can discuss. We can have an open and honest discussion about that. And then usually out of that process, you might not get 100% of what you wanted, but you'll get like 60 or 70% of what you wanted. And that 30% that you got rid of, maybe you needed to get rid of it sometimes too, right? So yeah, I think if you're really upfront about what you want to do and what you don't want to do, which is also equally as important, if you're someone says, hey, pitch them a thing, and then you have a conversation about it. Tell them what you don't want to do. Let them know, I don't want to do that. I'm not I'm not throwing shade at anyone else's work, but this choice or that choice or that choice, I don't do that well. That's not where I want to take this. I want to go over here with it. So yeah, I think if you have those conversations often and early, you can avoid some of the wailing and gnashing of teeth that can come when you get an email back from your editor.
I know that's valid advice. And I know we went way longer than you had originally intended, but I do want to value your time, and I deeply appreciate A, having the conversation, B, answering some of these folks' questions that came out to join us.
Did we get through all the questions? I don't want to skip anybody's question.
There was some lucky dude just says won't go full Alan Moore and just say F the big two.
Well, once I get into my period where I'm a recluse, then perhaps I'll stop writing for the big two. But in order to do that, I need to master the aspects of magic and the grimoires, and there is much time left for my studies.
Your impersonations are ridiculously good.
I watch a lot of Alan on YouTube. I'm a huge fan of Alan. So
the next conversation we have, I need. Would we call you like I don't, Barack Obama when you get that impersonation.
Yeah, I'll tell you. Yeah. The next conversation we have, we can do. I'll just be a clown at the end of it, and that seems like a good 2019 thing to do. So
That sounds really, really good, man. Thank you so much for sitting down and having this conversation with
oh,
me.
thanks for inviting me, man. I always enjoy it, and thanks everyone for watching or listening, or however you have participated in this content. And thank you very much for your questions. And yeah, if you have more that I didn't get to tonight, find me on Twitter at Bryan Edward Hill. That's Bryan with a Y, at Bryan Edward Hill. Find me on Twitter, and I'll answer them there. I mean, obviously it's the holidays, so it might be a week before I get to you, but I get to everyone eventually.
No, he does. And the link for that's in the description below. Make sure you guys go follow him, check him out. And so one of the things I want to do here is for those of you watching this this recording, I'm gonna give somebody watching a free digital copy of American Carnage #1 because I want you
Ooh,
guys to be reading this.
right on.
I think it's absolutely spectacular, and I'm not just saying this because he's here. For those of you that have talked to me outside of this, I'm thoroughly enjoying the series. It finds an excellent way at being topical and approaching these very humanitarian issues without really pointing fingers and finding, again, recognizing that American idealism has ultimately, fallen down to something that is kind of carnal. So we're going to be giving that out. Make sure what I want you guys to do is follow us both on Twitter. You have to be subscribed to the channel. Tweet at both of us. What was your favorite part of this interview? Was it a question that Bryan answered? Was it his Alan Moore impression? Let us know on Twitter. Tag both of us, and we'll decide that in a couple days.
Right
And I will
on.
be
That's awesome.
no, I mean people. I want people to be reading this, and I will later this week. I'm going to be doing a video, really focusing on American Carnage #2, Freedom Fighters #1 by Rob Venditti, and the new issue of Aquaman by Kelly Sue and Robson Roca. So we'll probably also be giving away a free digital copy on that episode too, because I want you guys to be checking this out. And I can't thank you guys enough for watching and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed this, please make sure you subscribe down below. Hopefully, we'll be able to have Bryan on sometime in the near future and chat some more comics, chat some more TV, and overall just good geeky conversation. And again, follow us on Twitter. Make sure you go check the American Carnage #1 and #2 out, already in stores, and be anxiously awaiting Batman and the Outsiders just as I am. So
Right on. Well, thanks everyone, and everyone enjoy all the holidays, and have a good time. But be safe. Be safe while you're having a good time. And I'll talk to everyone in 2019.
we'll see you guys in 2019, guys. This is going to be Dark Knight Nation and the spectacular Jedi Master of Comic Books, Bryan Edward Hill, signing out. Have a great rest of your night, guys. Thank you for watching.